everyone. Thanks so much for joining in and joining again on our second episode here of The Road to Cyber, where we're talking about more advanced techniques and methodologies for protecting or shoring up enterprise environments. We're already getting some panel discussions here, which is awesome. I really love the conversations that are being built out, and I'm really grateful that people are engaged. I think we'll get to that in a little bit. Right now, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about some of the top 10 cybersecurity fundamentals for small to medium businesses. Thanks again for joining, and I hope you have a good time on the road here. We're going to just jump right in. Of course. So as we sort of walk into this initial part of it here, we're going to move through again all of the webinar Road to Cyber. Every brick in the Road to Cyber is built on an existing article that you can go and read about yourself. They won't always be written by me. They'll be written by and presented by other members of our staff, which is great, sort of being able to open it up, because if you can imagine it, I'm not an expert at. Actually, I would say that I'm probably not an expert at a whole lot of stuff, but just trying to do my best to share the information that I do have. So as we kind of move down through here, some of the top 10 cybersecurity fundamentals for small and medium businesses. In my opinion, one of the very first core concepts is asset management programs, developing an idea of what you have in your environment, understanding what's there, understanding what your potential technical debt is, and how you can scope that to start even the process of vulnerability identification. If you don't have a good asset management process or a program, then really the entire life cycle of shoring up or implementing security is lost on you, because if you have endpoints out there on the internet that you don't have any idea that are there, you're basically just have exposure that you're not even aware of. So develop an effective asset management program would be one of the first ones I would highly suggest you move through. As we talked about last time in our Road to Cyber, we talked about what the end goal of lots of hackers are to gain access to what might be considered critical data or critical assets in your environment. So as a network security engineer or a system administrator, or whatever it is that your role is in order to protect your network infrastructure, your key step there is identifying what your critical data, critical personnel, or critical assets are. And we have lots of different images and breaking them out. Really, we're just developing images that make them easier for people to remember by doing case studies on learning how to learn, and then implementing different images and educational processes to shore up the capabilities for the learning process. So a lot of this content and different images that we present is not ours. They're industry standards. Maybe they're from NIST. Maybe they're from some of our partner cybersecurity firms. And you can go out there and find them on the internet. We're just representing good informative data that already exists. So as we sort of move through, some of the information might be PII, personally identifiable information, health records, PCI information, credit card info, intellectual property, that might be developed code, software, so on and so forth, accounting data, financial records, financial data, how to submit wire transfers, and so on and so forth. And then, of course, if you're in the process of mergers and acquisitions, what you might be bidding on, what contracts you might have open. That information is like really, really private, very proprietary, or intellectual property, if you will. And if somebody hacked your organization and gained access to what your proposal looks like for bidding on a major contract, and then it's a $500 million contract, and they come in and say, I can actually do all of this for $450 million, and they submit it because they know that they can fulfill the same requirements for $50 million less, or all of the same offerings. Well, now you've just, by not protecting your environment, lost more work. So again, sort of the next stage here is ensuring that you have properly implemented, HIDS or NIDS-based platforms. Those are going to be host intrusion prevention systems or network-based intrusion prevention systems, and ensuring that they're shored up and configured properly. For the case of this conversation, we're actually not going to go through the more idiosyncrasies of ensuring like what that looks like. How do you configure a host-based antivirus or network-based intrusion prevention system? We'll discuss those at different times, but for right now, we're just going through. You need to start doing research. Do you have an antivirus on your machines? Do you have an antivirus on every machine in your network? Do you have network-based firewalls, network-based intrusion prevention systems, whether or not to be from the outside to the inside, from the inside to the outside, from the inside to the inside? Are you able to, or once computer hackers are inside, are they able to migrate and move around and perform different types of exploitation? So introduce spam filtering and virus prevention and email systems. Some of these processes might, this is just very standard if you have an email infrastructure, whether or not that be hosted by Gmail, hosted by some other Office 365 platform or something. They do offer core security elements, but more advanced, implementing more advanced security elements is a key part of that process. So ensuring that you're implementing additional security features and virus protection on your email systems is really, really important. And that process, for example, network or let's just say host-based intrusion prevention systems, like an antivirus, for instance, is designed and configured to capture known threats based on known signatures. And if they can often be configured based on heuristic identification if it's performing some specific action. However, if an email comes in, is not captured by your email server, and then goes to the local machine, somebody opens a file and it runs some exploit and is successful, then you basically have allowed for a threat to make it inside of the environment that your antivirus or your host-based IPS is not able to see. Well, lots of email configurations do run what you might call sandbox exploiting, if you will, sandbox investigation, where you can see if there's some type of particular malicious activity on that platform. If you implement those, you can actually prevent that email from ever even making it to the end user. And that's why this part of this is so incredibly important. So establishing realistic update and patch management processes. Obviously, if you're going to say, I'm going to install patches and perform patch management on every single machine as soon as they come out on the exact day. If you have 10,000 machines, obviously that's, that could be kind of unrealistic. You need to implement security practices that might say within 30 days or 10 days, 7 days, 14 days. There are general cybersecurity best practices in the environment, but by me sharing that with you, you might say, okay, well, this is what I need to do. You need to research what you might be in compliance with, what your standards might be. I'm not a compliance authority, so I'm not going to tell you what those are because I don't know what all of them are. And so you need to ensure that you research what those are and implement them accordingly. One of the processes here within that practice is as you implement a lot of these different steps, you'll start to realize where your organization fits within the entire community-based cybersecurity maturity model. That might be, I know what my assets are. I'm running vulnerability scans. I'm running a vulnerability assessment. I'm practicing an annual, or I'm performing an annual penetration test with some third party, or we've hired someone internally to do that. We have AVs installed on all of our machines. We have a network-based intrusion prevention system. So you can see as you implement all these different things, your leadership is aware of what's happening. You have processes for mitigation and incident response. All is the ecosystem of the cybersecurity maturity model and where you fit within that model. So configure proper backup data loss. Configure proper backups and data loss prevention. That might be, for instance, if you have a hard drive that got crashed and you need to back that up by backing things up either internally in your local network or to the cloud if you're using some type of a service. It's incredibly important for crashes, infrastructure failure, and for instance, like if you're attacked with ransomware. If you're attacked with ransomware, implementing proper security practices like backup will allow for you to potentially re-image a machine and then just restore all of your critical data. One of the primary mitigation steps for combating ransomware. So additionally, within that core structure that we discussed before, you have an entire model of moving around the pen testing lifecycle and then moving in reverse and talking about how do you implement or solve some of those security gaps. So by doing that, what you're actually talking about is if you're talking about critical data and who can access that, who can get to it and from where, who has access to computers, can you get it on a local machine and install some type of malware? That's all considered visibility. Is there something happening in your environment that you can't see? If there's something happening in your environment, hackers, or let's just say attackers, I want to say hackers, attackers moving from one machine or subnetwork to another, and you can't see that, that's considered a network visibility gap. And so identifying and closing those enterprise-wide network visibility gaps is one of the core elements of implementing or increasing your security posture. So implementing stricter user access control policies. Obviously, user access controls is really important. Do you have a server with financial data on it? Can everyone in your network see it? Well, that's a pretty big problem. You need to lock that down and ensuring that that's configured properly. Do you have open RDP sessions throughout your entire environment? Can anyone RDP in any of those machines? Well, they shouldn't be able to do that. Implementing two-factor authentication or multi-factor authentication, depending upon what elements you're using. Those are a good way of sort of shoring up maybe people's potential of being able to access those from more than just using an additional password. So again, establishing professional vulnerability management programs. That's, all the way back up to the very top of an asset management program. Once you have a solid asset management program and you know what's there, then the next step after all of these steps in between is performing vulnerability assessments, vulnerability scans, identifying what your potential risks are within there by scanning it and seeing what the vulnerabilities are. Those vulnerabilities are going to be mitigated by proper patch management, updating of operating systems, or even replacing of outdated or end-of-life software and infrastructure. As you can see, there's a vulnerability management lifecycle. You might have a non-existent program today, which is completely fine. It's completely fine that it's there today. Don't feel like that you're so behind that you have nothing. If it's there and you have nothing, then just start the process of scanning. Once you start the process of scanning and identifying what's there, move to the next step of, okay, what is actually our compliance requirements? Maybe we need to be doing that. To the next step, okay, is anyone analyzing all of these scans? No one's taking a look. Okay, we need to actually either have a security professional looking at these and giving us feedback. And then what does our attack management or mitigation response processes look like? Do we even have SOPs, standard operating procedures, that sort of govern our processes for responding to those? Getting all of that data and all that stuff shored up is also an extremely important part of the process. So you have kind of, again, your blissful ignorance, awareness, and early maturity, business risk and context, and then sort of where your overlaps are. So again, sort of one of my key elements of like what I generally do, establish an annual penetration testing program. Hire computer hackers, hire ethical computer hackers in order to test your infrastructure to see, can they gain access to it? Obviously, you have compliance requirements that often need to be tested. We have these core elements that need to be tested. But if you have 550 different machines, that are externally accessible, and you test 5 of them because those are your compliant machines, but all other 550 machines can touch those 5, you might be getting that checkbox for compliance, but you're not really doing anything to help. Because if everybody else can really touch that and access those machines, but all these other 545 machines are all vulnerable by an easy default password and upload a shell, well, you're not really secure. And by testing those 5 machines, it's just a false sense of security. So understanding a network-wide or a full scope pen test and having that performed in your environment, knowing what those results are, and then being able to start to implement mitigation and security resolutions for those is really kind of, now you're at the peak of your, you're at the peak of that cybersecurity maturity model of what you're doing. Leadership is very aware of it. We know what our gaps are. We know what our risk looks like. So, so that's kind of what a lot of those look like. I'm going to go ahead and hit stop share here, and let's read up some of these. So, so some of these questions are, for instance, the first one's what's your take on the Zoom security, if you will. I think that Zoom has done a really great job of responding and implementing different security practices that enforce people to have best practices automatically or by default implemented on their meetings, if you will. Obviously, a webinar does not allow for other people to share their screen or even communicate, and so that's why this is open and anyone can join. You can see whatever you want. So the next question actually is a pretty good question. How do I know if the firewall of my internet provider is any good or configured correctly? So my understanding there that question is based on the firewall that is for my own internal infrastructure. One of the primary ways that you would know if it's good or not is testing it. If you have computer hackers try to process it, bypass it, punch holes in it, depending upon what the firewall is actually for, you can have all different types of firewalls. Network-based firewalls, web application firewalls. There's tons of other different types of firewalls. So depending on what that goal of the firewall is, actually having it tested. There are a whole series of best practices for implementations of what needs to be implied. But in order to actually give you a lot of those answers and those steps and those bullets, I would just want to make sure that I do my due diligence to research those, and then maybe just do one of the bricks in the road to cyber on firewall security. So so again, one of the other questions here is in the event that firewall was implemented or used for your home, for instance. So if a home you have a firewall at your house, obviously performing a penetration test on that is not very practical. But if that's the case and you want to ensure that that's up to par, one of the first steps I would probably encourage is ensuring that's enabled. Is it plugged in? Is it turned on? So and then sort of doing a little bit of research and understanding what the core functions and elements of a firewall are. If you want to learn how to do that yourself, you can hire an ISP or a security firm to come in and do that for you. But again, just doing that general research on what the core elements of what you're trying to prevent, whether or not it be outbound activity for little children or inbound activity for potential hackers. So, so those are great questions. I do encourage everyone to pitch in some questions and ask things if you have them along the way. That is going to be that's going to conclude our top 10 cybersecurity fundamentals for small and medium businesses. Thanks a lot for joining, and we'll talk to you next time on the Road to Cyber.